Mixed martial arts might be a young sport, but it's had quite the journey. Once a niche attraction that survived exclusively on seedy internet forums and videotapes, blockbuster rentals, that sort of thing, it transformed into a thriving ESPN darling and a staple of their programming, especially now. Much of this is thanks to the efforts of ambitious promoters, investors, audacious television execs, open-minded regulators, and of course, the fans. But it's all about the fighters at the end of the day, and some did just a bit more to change the sport, in some cases for the better, some a little worse, and even some that fall in between. So who really shaped what we see in the sport today? Hey everyone, Jason here. I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsor for this video, and that is Origin. If you're not familiar with them, they are actually owned by Jocko Willink himself, and in addition to their amazing line of supplements that we talked about on the last video, they also offer incredible tasting energy drinks with no sugar and only 5 calories. It's insane how good this all tastes, let alone how healthy it is. Save 20% off with them at originmain.com/JockoFuel using the special code MMAOnPoint20 at checkout. Anyhow, more on them later. Back to the video. These are 10 fighters who changed MMA. Number 10, Hoist Gracie. You can't teach MMA history without mentioning Hoist Gracie. And I think it makes sense to start here, in part because it's pretty obvious with the explosion of the sport, but it also happened first. Not only did he change MMA, we didn't even know what to call it back then, but he really changed all of fighting. Before Gracie, which is essentially MMA's equivalent to before Christ, choreographed martial arts films and boxing matches dictated what type of combat was thought to be effective. But that all changed when a skinny Brazilian kid in a gi, Hoist Gracie, strangled that concept into submission. And he attacked it from all angles by overcoming larger opponents who epitomized the world's misconceptions. He tapped Art Jimerson, a pro boxer who wore one glove, conquered a muscle-bound, roided-out Ken Shamrock who looked 200 times more intimidating than he. And in the final, he choked down a 6'4" Kyokushin karate fighter Gerard Gordeau. Basically, UFC 1's villain with that illegal bite and horrible transgressions later on in the sport as well. And it was all shocking to a 1993 society that had a warped perception of what fighting truly was. He introduced BJJ to the whole world at UFC 1, and while certainly he wasn't the inventor of it, nor was he even the best of their family ranks, there's no doubting how game-changing that initial UFC run was. Number 9, Ken Shamrock. Make no mistake about it, Ken Shamrock is undoubtedly a mixed martial arts pioneer. He was already a 3-fight veteran of Pancrase before UFC 1, and thanks to his ties to pro wrestling, he's arguably responsible for attracting more new fans to the sport than anyone ever had to that point in his era. But he's on this list not just for those accolades, but for his contributions to training. In the sport's infancy, MMA practice had little to no structure, and fighters were typically left to their own devices. That usually meant that despite the style versus style nature of contest, each discipline was trained basically independently. Karate guys stayed in the dojo and wrestlers remained on the mat. Gracies trained with Gracies, that sort of thing. This left Shamrock frustrated because it made it impossible to find suitable sparring partners. So he came up with a solution: consolidate fighters from varying backgrounds and form a team, and thus the Lion's Den was born. Credited as MMA's first mega camp outside of the Gracie family, which in my opinion is totally different because it basically stayed inside family lines, Shamrock's brainchild united submission grapplers, kickboxers, and wrestlers under one roof to create an all-encompassing program aimed towards mixed martial arts training. And it was hugely successful, producing fighters like his adopted brother Frank, Maurice Smith, Oleg Taktarov, and P.D. Williams. It was truly the precursor to the super camps of today like AKA, Jackson Wink, and ATT. And despite splitting off, it was the inspiration for Frank Shamrock, who notably perfected this concept and even brought in AKA's now head coach Javier Mendez in from the kickboxing world. With the lineage of these mega camps and their very long list of champions, there's no doubt this formidable initial alliance of the Lion's Den was a major bridge to shaping the concept of cross-training and bridging disciplines. Number 8, Tito Ortiz. These days, the Huntington Beach bad boy might be best known for his bizarre sound bites.
5 days a week, I'll train 3 days a week. One of those days, I will train 2 days of the week.
His awkward trash talk, and perhaps an alleged drunk boat driving incident while on the campaign trail. And while Hoist was the star of the UFC's earliest days, it was Ortiz who became a real superstar that was first recognized outside of the MMA bubble at the time when the sport needed it the most. the Dark Ages. His feud with Ken Shamrock was a box office smash when the UFC was truly drowning in debt. Industry insiders, including Big John McCarthy, have even insisted that their bout at UFC 40 rescued the promotion from bankruptcy. Moreover, his rivalry with UFC President Dana White was also very significant, albeit for different reasons. Who could forget the Dana is my bitch t-shirt in their proposed boxing match, which even had a Spike TV documentary special. Beyond the trivial moments though, it ultimately represented something bigger. Ortiz was a true legacy champion with a record amount of defenses back then in his prime. And no matter what you might want to say about all of his faults, he shaped effective self-promotion in MMA and even a bit of fighters' rights by standing up to the brass. He proved that it could be done, and yes, sadly the sport has a much longer way to go in that regard, but progress is progress. Tito was instrumental in saving the sport back in the Dark Ages and propelled it forward to the present day. Number 7, Chuck Liddell. You didn't think we'd mention Tito and not Chuck on this list, right? Well, while wrestlers like Mark Coleman and Tito Ortiz were perfecting their ground game, Chuck Liddell changed the game by using his wrestling in reverse to keep the fight standing, an approach now adopted by the likes of Yoel Romero, Justin Gaethje, and Tyron Woodley, Stipe against Cormier. Plenty of other examples could be named here. Yet despite perfecting the cage walk as it were, the Iceman's lasting legacy was even greater. I mean, when a non-fight fan closes their eyes and imagines a typical MMA fighter, chances are they're going to picture Chuck Liddell. With his patented mohawk, tattoos, and killer be killed attitude, he epitomized mixed martial arts. And along with his former training partner turned rival Tito Ortiz, he transcended the sport by becoming a mainstay of pop culture. He was accepted by mainstream athletes back then despite their reluctance to accept the sport itself that he competed in. And this strange dichotomy led him to gracing the cover of ESPN magazine in 2007, making him the first UFC fighter to do so. He even had several cameos in popular entertainment, even including the stoner cult classic How High, making him the go-to whenever Hollywood needed a real badass to legitimize a production. So badass, bro. Moreover, he coached on the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, a landmark series for the UFC in reality television format that, opposite Randy Couture, was credited with saving the sport in North America. He was the perfect antithesis and foil to Tito's loudmouth, brash style, and pulled MMA along with him into superstardom beyond what anyone had achieved in America. Number 6, George St Pierre. The types of personalities we've seen on here are from the controversial and brash varieties mostly, but make no mistake, just one word can encapsulate this man's persona: professional. And many indeed do herald him as the GOAT of MMA. During his incredible run as welterweight champion, as well as his brief stint as the middleweight king, he brought unequaled dignity, order, and civility to an otherwise rebellious and chaotic sport. At a time when a hoodie and baseball cap were standard fare for a fighter's press conference uniform, GSP always wore tailored suits. Even Dana White will dress down at events sometimes. And while the Condom Depot and the gun store were regularly printed on fighters' trunks during this era, and even still now with Justin Gaethje and his sponsorship with Trojan,
I dropped my monster condom that I use for my Magnum Dong.
GSP stepped it up by attracting marquee brands like Gatorade and Under Armour. In fact, the Under Armour deal almost torpedoed his deal at UFC 217 thanks to the obvious conflict of interest between them and the UFC's then competing outfitter Reebok. Regardless, St Pierre was an infinitely investable figure, and while many previous champions like Rich Franklin deserve an honorable mention for proving that MMA fighters weren't all brutes, St Pierre was able to pair that with the kind of commercial success that led to the corporate world's approval of the sport. Number 5, Chael Sonnen. MMA is truly a menagerie. It's always housed interesting and peculiar characters who maneuver themselves into unexpected opportunities. And by 2010, Chael Sonnen was basically as an unknown talent as a quiet, top-level All-American wrestler. Enter the best streak of his life in an impending clash with one of MMA's true GOAT contenders, Anderson Silva. Suddenly, a switch flipped. Gone was the "I'll do my talking in the cage" approach, and in with Sonnen's ability that would far surpass that of Tito's trash talk with the balls of a self-proclaimed gangster from West Lynn as he verbally attacked the middleweight champion.
I am a gangster from America. Are you sure you want to play that game with me?
Welcome to the pre-funk of Anderson Silva's retirement party, hosted by yours truly tomorrow night.
And it worked, because despite losing the fight and failing a pre-fight drug test, Holy shit, that would have been crazy if he won. All because he gave Silva the fight of his life after an untouchable run to that point, and of course, his promotional machinations that made him a star, allowing him to quickly earn a rematch and a win against Brian Stann. Most agreed he did deserve it, especially because he came so close to beating the Spider the first time. However, it was his title opportunity against Jon Jones that caused a huge rift among fans. Coming off of a second loss to Silva, Sonnen was awarded with a title opportunity at light heavyweight despite not competing in the weight class for years. Clearly, popularity took a precedent over merit in this case, and while Sonnen wasn't the first fighter to benefit from that reality, he certainly escalated it, and its effects are evident in matchmaking today. So no doubt, he revolutionized the very concept of trash talk in MMA and self-promotion, but also the way fights are booked today. Number 4, Jon Jones. We could talk about Jones's legacy in a variety of ways as a top-level fighter for the better part of 10 years in the UFC, and that could be enough to justify his inclusion on this list, but while certainly not intentional, Jones shifted the UFC's drug testing policy in a very different and perhaps, hear me out, better direction.
Explain yourself.
Past instances of drug sentencing ran the gamut from indifference to exorbitance. From a Josh Barnett only receiving a warning and subsequently getting a title shot after pissing hot at UFC 34, to the wild 5-year ban that Nick Diaz got for flunking a marijuana test at UFC 183. It was all over the place. The introduction of USADA, however, as flawed as it may be, added some level of consistency to the process. Still incredibly punitive stances were taken, leaving many fighters burdened with the task of trying to prove their innocence. Ahead of UFC 200, Jon Jones found himself in that position after allegedly taking contaminated boner pills. Yeah, that happens. However, it was the aftermath of his overturned UFC 214 win for Turinabol that would create a particularly novel situation. Leading into UFC 232, metabolites of the same substance appeared in his samples yet again, but instead of throwing the book back at him, which is what USADA had done recently to Frank Mir and Tom Lawler and even Josh Barnett, along with many others, they determined the amount was so low that it was likely a residual effect from the initial ingestion back at UFC 214. Despite this ruling, the Nevada State Athletic Commission refused to sanction Jones without some sort of hearing. This being over the Christmas break and no time to do that, the UFC moved the event from Las Vegas to Los Angeles in California, where they would sanction it on less than a week's notice. And make no mistake, this was incredibly controversial, but think about it. The Lawlers and Mirs, who were blatantly banned for substantial amounts of time for basically the same thing, fighters now actually get reduced or even no suspension as a result of this precedent being set. Remember Nate Diaz's initial test failure for the BMF title fight that was overturned within just a matter of hours? USADA doesn't even announce test failures until they're fully adjudicated now. I don't know if this would have happened without the Jones incident. Regardless of your feelings about this whole situation, which I fully sympathize with all the criticism, it has helped fighters in the way that test results are now handled. Number 3, Conor McGregor. Just a mention of the Notorious's name tends to start arguments in the comment section, but he is one of the more recent ones who's had a huge impact on the sport, and that's one of the major criteria for how this list has been ordered. But let's be real, he deserves a place on this list. Conor McGregor has kicked down many doors in MMA and consequently changed the sport, no doubt for the good and bad. As his celebrity grew, he became exceedingly polarizing. Those two elements seemed to work well enough though, shattering pay-per-view records like Conor would a stranger's cell phone. And it was clear he was destined for greatness from the get-go. And only his second UFC fight, his level of notoriety was so huge that he was given the lights-out treatment in his walkout, a thing that is normally reserved for the main event. He was on the prelims. But that was just the beginning. Soon he'd be granted unprecedented power to break many of the rules. While the UFC was adamant that they would never co-promote, infamously failing to sign Fedor on these grounds, they willingly played the B-side to the money team for the Mayweather-McGregor clash. One reason? A shitload of money. Not even Anderson Silva in his prime had that kind of leverage when he practically begged for a crossover fight with Roy Jones Jr., and Dana White cheerleaded this whole thing. And the co-promotion definitely continued with his Whiskey Proper 12 plastered all over the octagon as the official partner for the record-breaking UFC 229. All this at a time where fighters couldn't even have their own sponsors on their shorts, much less the entire canvas. So while not everyone will receive this sort of treatment, for both reasons good and bad, Conor has undoubtedly brought more eyes to the sport and created an army of new fans. Even if many of those people dislike him now, they're still here watching the sport. Number 2, Ronda Rousey. Yeah, she's controversial, but you have to think about it this way. Very few monumental moments in an entire industry can be traced back to one single person. In 2011, Dana White famously declared that women would never compete in the octagon.
What an idiot that guy was.
Yet just 1 year later, Ronda Rousey was awarded the first UFC women's title after they absorbed Strikeforce while she was their champion. And then in 2013, she made her promotional debut for the UFC in the main event of their pay-per-view. Her rise didn't just signal the arrival of a new star, it marked the beginning of a new era in the UFC, so she didn't just change Dana's mind, she changed the minds of fight fans all around the world. And while the aforementioned McGregor, Ortiz, Liddell, Silva, Jones transcended the sport, Rousey didn't just take WMMA to the big stage, she truly took it out to the entire world. Her rise to stardom was unprecedented because of the sort of media who were interested in her story. In many ways, MMA still doesn't have that kind of exposure in her absence. Any other fighters you see being invited on SNL anytime soon, or Ellen DeGeneres? Is her show still around?
How should I know?
I'd truly be remiss if I didn't credit other pioneers like Gina Carano, Chris Cyborg, and way too many others to name, but the UFC wasn't willing to bite on any of them, and what matters is they were willing to bite on Rousey, who got everyone in the door when she came around. Now, an MMA card, let alone a UFC event, feels incomplete without women fighting on the bill. Like Rousey or not, I share many of those criticisms. She deserves all the credit in the world for what she did. And number one, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Truth be told, Khabib was not even supposed to be in this video originally, but after his absolutely phenomenal performance at UFC 254 and subsequent shocking / awe-inspiring retirement in the wake of everything from his father's death and the extreme circumstances of our present time, there's just no doubt at all how significant that this is. No one in the history of MMA has ever retired at this level undefeated. This is completely unprecedented on so many levels in the sport that it represents a new gold standard for how future athletes will seek to shape their legacies and what it means to be mentioned among the greatest ever. It's tremendously influential, and while MMA retirements are usually in the territory of the boy who cried wolf, with so many coming back in short order, myself and the rest of the team here at MMA On Point that I've talked to agree that if anybody has ever meant a retirement will stick, and for the right reasons, it's going to be with Khabib. I'll personally leave the GOAT discussion to you all on this one, as that will perpetually be debated forever among fans, but there is just no doubting his place in the discussion. Between being undefeated, essentially making it look easy going through the top competition, the guy dominated his entire career. You can only argue he lost 1 or 2 rounds. And with this fitting the chronology of the oldest to the newest of this list being the most recent, it absolutely fits the #1 designation on this list. Thank you so much for an incredible, no doubt Hall of Fame career, Khabib. You have truly inspired the whole world. And speaking of game-changing, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, and that is Origin, who, if you don't know, is Jocko Willink's own brand. And today we're looking at their line of energy drinks in Jocko Go. I'm drinking my personal favorite right now, which is called Dax Savage. That is a blend between black cherry and vanilla. It's just unreal how good this tastes. It's legit become my favorite energy drink, period, based on taste alone. But that's only half of the story, because it's crazy healthy with no sugar and only 5 calories. That's true of all their energy drinks in this line as well. Their iced tea lemonade, lemon lime flavor, their pineapple coconut blend, all just 5 calories. So it's not just healthy, not just smart, frankly, but it just tastes amazing. If you want to try it out yourself, you can order it on their website today, originmain.com/JockoFuel, and you'll save a full 20% off on this or anything else you order using the code MMAOnPoint20 at checkout. Links are in the description. And I think it's really important that I take the time to say how much I appreciate this. MMA On Point is looking at setting up a studio with Tom, myself, and the rest of the team. So when you're supporting them, you're not just supporting them because they're amazing, but they also support us, and it's a really big deal. So massive shout out to them, and appreciate you guys watching today's video. I'd like to give huge thanks to the writer of this list, that is Robert Palin. Really appreciate his help here. You can follow him on Twitter at @TheRobertPalin. And then, of course, the editor of this list, Max Rando, who is on double duty this week. Crazy work ethic. You can follow him on Twitter at Max_Randall. Thanks for watching my list, guys. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe and like. We upload at least 3 videos per week about MMA, and it really helps us out when you do so. If I missed anything on this vid, let me know in the comments, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at JasonTheHeart, or follow the official channel account at OnPointMMA. Thanks for watching so much, and I'll catch you on the next video.